cases and then adapted them to our network. What would that scenario mean at Mitre? We had a number of different folks of varying seniority at Mitre execute the scenarios using their own accounts. Their data was processed along with the background data. We didn't splice it in or introduce any artifacts into the data set by trying to put stuff in and take stuff out like that. And the other thing I'd mention is that these scenarios were not tightly scripted. You know, first do A, then do B. It was more the red team members were more or less given an objective, general set of rules of behavior, and then told to go ahead in a certain amount of time, and then told to go ahead and try to achieve their objective. During this time, the team developing the approach, the Elicit approach, had no knowledge of who was going to do the scenarios, when they were going to do it, nor what they were going to do. In terms of results, we basically Elicit, again, scores things from 0 to 1. We set, just for initial detection measurement, the decision threshold at 0.5. And basically there were 19 user days of known bad malicious behavior associated with the red teams. And of those, we detected them above 0.5 on 16 of those days. During that same time, we had about an average of 1,500 users active, and about 23 were also above that 0.5 level. So from there, we were able to get a false alarm rate. The table on the right simply shows for each user they occurred over a number of days, anywhere from 1 to 5 days. The far left column tells you the scenario, and then you have each day of the activity. These days were not consecutive. There were gaps in between the days, but we just marked them as day 1, day 2, etc. The next column over tells you what their actual threat score was, and then you had the threat rank. And for a lot of the detects, we had them at or near the very top of the list, which was very good. We were very happy with that. Of course, we also looked at why we didn't detect things, and a lot of times either there was certain days the red teams, certain members just didn't do much. There's a certain threshold beneath which you're just not going to be able to generate enough threat score. They didn't do enough things that you would see for you to be able to say much about what they did. There was also sometimes they did things we didn't expect. This is, one of the challenges is building a portfolio that's robust, that can catch them no matter what they do. That's very hard to do in practice, and they were able to find ways. Now they didn't know how we were detecting, but they were able to do things in some cases that we just didn't expect. One of the interesting things is that we looked at our false alarms and what was causing the false alarms, and we noticed that our non-technical admin staff, like our secretaries, office coordinator type people, overwhelmingly generated a lot the false alarms. Does anyone care to venture a guess why? Yeah.
They do stuff on behalf of their supervisor?
Not just one supervisor. They're kind of a funnel. They have multiple people. Hey, can you prepare this information for this? Hey, can you do that? And at least at our company, they get tasked by many people. And so they're constantly working with information, and they're gathering information. From day to day, their activities change, and so they ended up just because of their intensive activity with information combined with gathering information from all parts of the organization, things that were atypical for them. It turned out to generate, that generated a lot of false alarms. We feel that these results are a good improvement over a lot of the current practice. The current practice isn't pretty. I mean, a lot of times you have organizations randomly selecting users to audit their behavior. Maybe slightly better would be auditing based on the volume of activity, if you believe that that's correlated to maliciousness. We found with a lot of our we found with our behavior that threat scores in general, we actually did a correlation measurement of threat score versus the number of events for 2 months during which the red teams were active, and there was no correlation. So I'm going to talk really quick now about some additional research we did, because we felt that we had some promising results with the initial work, but there were some open questions. We obviously didn't discover all the possible things malicious insiders could do. We were also interested in exploring. We had looked at things from a network perspective. We wanted to see what you could see in addition from a host-based perspective. And finally, we also wanted to look at the human factors side of things. So what we put together was a multidisciplinary team. We had some behavioral psychologists, Deanna Caputo, and then some computer scientists form a team. And really what the whole idea was, look, if you have two groups of users, they're going after the same information under the same circumstances, there's simply a different motivation, one being benign, one being malicious, would that cause them to behave in statistically meaningful, ways that are different and statistically meaningful? So that was kind of the idea there. And our main hypotheses, again, were, we thought that malicious users would gather information in similar patterns, benign users would gather information in similar patterns, and these patterns would be different. It's a bad analogy, but it's you kind of have rats in a maze. They're put in two different parts of the maze, and I don't want to compare employees to rats, but the cheese is the information. Do they take different pathways based on where they're put into the maze, and are they predictable paths? So we actually kind of borrowed the design from what the types of things they tend to do with experiments in psychology, in social science in general. We basically created a double-blind procedure where the participants, as far as they knew, were testing some kind of heuristic-based anti-keylogging software, and we had to go to elaborate depths to actually make them believe that. This experiment involved handing them a laptop, and they had to calibrate the keylogger when they first got on, and of course if they looked up the processes they would see a keylogger.exe, and we had to do all sorts of manner of sleight of hand to convince users that this was really about anti-keylogging. What it was really about was testing the differences in behavior. So basically we had two conditions and about the same number of participants that participated, one benign, the control group, and then the malicious. As I said, everything was kept the same. The scope that they were looking for information on a topic. Basically the topic was biosecurity, and they basically their environment was the same, and they had the same amount of time, which was 1 week, and the only thing was different was their intent or motivation, which we manipulated using scenarios. What we had to tell them was, look, I know anti-keylogging is not an exciting thing to test, so let me give you a role to play to at least make you get a little more into it. And this is an important thing, because if they don't get into the role, this is not an effective experiment. So this was really important to take a lot of time to get this right in terms of getting them into their role. In terms of participant selection, we tried to stratify by their cumulative job experience at Mitre. So we wanted everything from the junior folks, and I think the youngest person we had was like 20. The oldest person was like 72 and had been there like 40 years at Mitre. So very broad, very diverse group of people. And, we're trying to go for a more generalizable result. In terms of the procedure itself, we basically again, everything started with recruitment. Part of the double blind is not only not letting the participants know what the purpose is, but we had a proctor that also did not know what our core hypotheses and the central elements of the research was. They simply had a script that they were following, so we had to hire someone specifically for this. So the proctor was in charge of recruiting, and through a variety of techniques we were able to recruit across the organization and get people to participate in this, which was difficult because you're asking for a week of someone's time. So we had to do the usual consent forms, rules of behavior. They couldn't hack Mitre's network. We gave them a pre-questionnaire, which was really just for them to fill out biographical information about themselves. And again, all this data was anonymized, and we had to go through the MERB to get this approved.